Hello, everyone. Welcome to another new episode of ESL Talk.
We are your hosts, Faye.
And Daniel.
After last week's episode on storytelling, we hope you were able to take away some useful techniques to use for your own teaching. And in our episode today, we will learn all about how to teach as a polyglot.
Yes. How can learning or using multiple languages help us to become better teachers? And how can this help our students? And how can we combine our language knowledge to better serve our students?
And today we will speak to our guest, Silvia. She's an experienced online teacher and polyglot who shares her experience of teaching ESL online.
So, as we both have knowledge of more than one language, Faye, let's talk about our experiences using and teaching other languages. So, Faye, how has your knowledge of Portuguese, French, and English helped you with your ESL teaching roles?
Yes, I find that knowing these languages really helps me understand what students might be struggling with. It helps me predict a lot better what their issues might be. And once questions come up in class, it's a lot easier for me to understand why they're confused about that. Or if I see a student making a mistake, I'm better able to explain to them what their issue is or what the differences are between their language and English. And I really noticed that when I started learning Japanese. I only took it for like a couple months until we got to the different counting systems, and I tapped out. But it was just understanding Japanese sentence structure and sort of like the basic mechanics of the language really helped me work with my Japanese students. And not just the Japanese students, because I find that a lot of Asian languages are similarly constructed. So I find that just understanding how some things will not equate to them in the sentence structure. And
Right.
like I can't assume that subject, verb, object is the thing that they're going to go on.
Very,
right?
very true. Yeah, that's true.
How about for you, Daniel? How has your Korean knowledge helped you with teaching your students?
Similar to what you've said, I went through that experience of being sat in a classroom in a language school, learning Korean in Korea. So it was very much an immersion and a trial by fire kind of way of learning. But it helped me massively because, like you said, I understand the struggles that students go through. I understand why they make some of the errors that they make. I understand why they don't use some of the vocabulary or words that they should use that they know. And it also got me a better insight of some cultural differences as well in terms of arguing or having a discussion or a debate, as opposed to just saying, yes, I agree, because I've heard that a lot. And that always isn't the case. And again, by knowing that language, it's helped me to kind of think, okay, well, students might have this issue. So I'm kind of predicting and I'm trying to kind of put out fires before they come up. Now,
Definitely
again,
helps with lesson planning.
Yeah, for sure. But again, knowing the mix of students beforehand and knowing the nationalities or the first languages of other students can help you. And it's about mindset as well. The most important thing I learned when I was learning another language was to think in that language first and foremost, because we all do it. When we're moving between languages, students do it. They think in their first language. And then that's why we get the errors with grammar or tense or subject-verb agreement or articles or plurals, because those things might not exist or might be different in their language, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was learning French, which was the last language I learned fully after learning Portuguese and speaking Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And at certain points, I was like my brain would automatically translate to a word in all the other languages. It's funny. It wasn't always Portuguese or always English. It would be like the most similar one. Oh, so it's this word. But then I found that I couldn't remember the French words afterwards. I would just remember, oh yeah, this is that word that was similar to this word in Spanish. And then it's like, but what was it? And that really, it just confirmed what I used to tell my students already, that you should not rely on translation when you find a new word. Look at an English dictionary. And I would always tell them this experience of mine and be like, I speak from experience. I could not remember the new vocabulary I was learning because I was translating it automatically. So you kind of you have more tools to give your students, right, to work with language learning. Now, do you find that students are surprised to hear you speak their language when you're working with Korean students? Does this change the dynamic between you and your student at all?
So I never give that away first and foremost. Usually if I'm teaching online, students probably know because my profile and some of the information that I will send them, they'll receive will be in Korean. So if they're Korean students, they'll be like, oh, how does he know this? Sometimes they forget or sometimes they just don't pick it up. So
Yeah.
generally, I won't say anything. But then if there's circumstances or situations like with very young learners where they might need a word or a translation, then I'll do that. But
Hmm.
it is quite surprising for them, yes.
Yeah.
And again, it's always very interesting to hear what they have to say in their first
Hmm.
language and then be able
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
respond and say, wow, did you think that? Or really, is that your experience? And then
Right.
it's quite
Kind of
interesting.
surprise them and kind of
Yeah.
sneak up on them in a way.
Well, yeah, in a nice way.
In a nice way. Yeah.
It definitely changes the dynamic though, because I think you automatically have a deeper connection with that student because
Hmm.
you can obviously say, like you said to them, I've been through this process. I know what it's like. I've
Yeah.
learned your language. You're learning my language. So that definitely builds a deeper level of trust. And then
Hmm.
also within that as well, you're better able to understand their mindset and their thinking. And then not
Yeah.
only create materials and classes that they would enjoy, but pitch it in a way that they understand as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true.
Mhm. But when it comes to all these different languages, Faye, and obviously in your very vast experience, have you ever combined or used more than one language in your lessons before?
I can't really say that I have, because just like you, I try to hide the fact that I speak the other languages
Mhm.
because I find that once students know I can speak it, they get a little lazy and they
Right.
start to just say the word to me and say, "What is this in English? Or what about
Mhm.
this word?"
Mhm.
And whereas before they would be trying to explain themselves and use like English to express themselves like they would in everyday situations where they forget a word or they're trying to communicate. So I always tried to like nip that in the bud if it started to happen. If a student knew I spoke their language and then they started to try to use it, I would just always play dumb. I'm like, can you say that? Can you explain it in another way? And,
Right.
and they're like, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm like, I do, but I would like you to tell me in English.
Yeah.
And eventually they'd stop trying. And that's mostly because again, I don't want them to rely on translating and
Yes.
just like and often the things don't translate and they don't work that neatly.
Exactly.
A sentence, especially with sentences or idiomatic language, you can't just find an exact replacement for that.
That's very
So
true.
yeah, I've always been pretty anti translation in the classroom and using their first language. However, I do
Mhm.
think, because I don't have a lot of experience with low levels, I do think it can help remove some of the anxiety at low levels.
Right. I was going to say that when I have used more than one language, or not me, but I've asked my students to teach each other about their own languages. So, for example, when
Mm,
I worked in a high school, we had a very, very diverse mix of languages in the class. So I might have had in any one class, I might have had 10, 15, 20 different first languages spoken.
oh wow.
So I might use a section of that time to maybe, for a very basic English class. Okay, teach your partner 1 to 10 in your language, or
Yeah.
teach them to introduce themselves in your language.
Oh
And
yeah.
then that not only builds a level of comfortability amongst your learners, but it
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
helps them feel more comfortable and confident using English,
Yeah.
because as they're going through that other language, they can see that process, they can put themselves in the shoes of the others. And also as a teacher, it's nice for you because it's enabling students to communicate with each other in a way that they can do well, because they might not be able to
Yeah.
do it in English, but I
They
can
can in
teach
their
you
language.
10
Yeah.
words in my own language or introduce myself, or
Oh yeah,
and
that's a great
then
point.
using that as they introduce each other in each other's language. Now it's
Mm.
difficult, but it's really wonderful when things like that come off. That's a good example that I've found.
I never thought of doing that. That's a great idea, actually.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I just thought of because I did teach Portuguese for a little while,
Mhm.
and that's the most I've taught at lower levels was with Portuguese because
Right.
I taught levels 1 and 2 and 3. And that's when I actually started to use a combination of languages because I really tried to make my lessons fully Portuguese, but it was really hard. Students had no idea what I was talking about. So I found that in levels 1 and 2, I would use English to teach Portuguese for let's say half the time, and at level 2 I would use like English for like 40, and then 60% would be
Mhm,
Portuguese, and then
mhm.
as the levels progressed I would slowly like fade English into the background.
Right, right. I
But I
see.
haven't really done that with English as much because students usually have more familiarity with English than they do
Right. So
like.
on that note, how do you use other languages to help students if they're struggling or they're finding it difficult to follow the classes? If you're teaching a conversation class, maybe the levels are going to be quite different, or you have students who are very chatty, but maybe they're making a
Hmm.
lot of errors, maybe some who are more
Yeah.
quiet and more articulate. So how do you deal with that?
I find that often with students that are more advanced or they are more fluent, I'd say, they might not be as accurate, right? And
Right.
then you might have that student who's actually very focused on accuracy, and then their fluency will suffer. So I find that like similar to what you do, but not exactly teaching each other their language. I basically, if I know their language, I'd point out things in their language that might be just as difficult in English. So for really advanced students, I find that often they start to complain when I start to focus on accuracy, and they're like, but this is stupid. Why do I need to learn this? Or, why is English so crazy? And then I had a French student who would say that all the time. And then I would point things out in French to him that made no sense. And then I said, imagine somebody learning this in French, like for the first time.
Yeah.
How would you explain that? And he's like, oh yeah. And then I would say, but this is it necessary? Should I learn this in French? He's like, yeah, people will say it, like you should know it. I'm like, exactly. It's the same thing with English. You could communicate without this knowledge of the grammar or whatever, but it won't be the same. So I think that that's usually how I would use like their own language. It's just sort of like point things out to them and show them that it's not just English, and everyone will suffer.
Right. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's now bring in our guest, Silvia, who's going to share more on her experiences as a Polyglot ESL teacher.
Hi, Silvia. Welcome to ESL Talk.
Hello.
Hi. It's good to have you with us. So Silvia, just wanted to start off today by asking you if you could share with us your teaching story, how you got started learning all these languages and where you are today in your teaching journey.
Oh, a lot of questions for the beginning. Thank you. Okay, teaching story. I was thinking about how to answer to that question. So actually, I call it more a learning story than a teaching one, because everything started. So if I'm not talking about foreign languages or languages at all. The teaching, learning story started a little bit more like many generations before. Yeah, so it's kind of transgenerational stuff and genetic destiny. My grandma, my great grandma, everyone, they were teachers at school, so like traditional teachers. And my teaching learning story started up with my sister. Yeah, when I was like 3 or 4 years old, she just wanted to teach me how to write and read, so I could play with her and read with her. Yeah, she was just bored. She's actually 5 years older than me, and that's when everything started. Because when I started at school, at the primary school, I already knew everything I needed to know. And so in order to avoid this boredom, I started to teach my own classmates. So when I saw somebody didn't understand, didn't catch an idea or was unsure, and I was having the feeling that the teacher is not approaching that way, it could be like the easiest way from my point of view. So I just called her and said, come here, I'm telling you how it is. So, and that's what everything started. Some teachers noticed that and they used me for explaining that stuff. So the more formal teaching story started after school, after my grammar school. I attended a grammar school where at that time in the 90s was very trendy to have informatics as a subject.
Yes.
Yeah. So I started to teach informatics to the youngest ones, a kindergarten, so just click enter here and escape there. And so they hired me actually to teach them, the younger children. And at the same time, so during my grammar school, I started to learn German. It's a foreign language in a language school. And there it ended up the same way. So the director of the school asked me to be there, to stay longer and to teach the beginners. So it was, as I'm telling you, such kind of destiny. When I think, I'm learning something new, so somebody just takes me in order to teach the thing I'm learning.
That's great.
Yeah, it's very, very funny. So it's something like sometimes I think, should I just go away from that and just try something different? And then I started studying economics. I'm from Guatemala, actually. And there I studied economics, the same. So when I finished my master's degree, Silvia, could you take over the course of blah, blah? Oh, God,
Wow.
I say, no, I don't want it anymore. So in a good sense, yes. And I said that I couldn't escape actually from that destiny. So I moved to the Czech Republic, where I got the scholarship for a PhD program in environmental economics. And I said, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I'm going to become a researcher, economist, no more teaching. Silvia, I have a group, environmental economics in English. In English? I said, oh God. So, and then that's how my teaching English career or way started actually. But more formally, if I come back a little bit to the German language, so there I had the opportunity to do a diploma for German teachers as a foreign language in Munich in Germany. So it was a program that I followed in Mexico, Guatemala, and Munich and Berlin. So it was like 2 years, so with some breaks. And there I learned a lot of the methodology and of these techniques, methodology, as I said, and ways to teach and to learn also at the same time, and a group of teachers who came from all over the world. So that was an amazing experience that helped me, how can I say so, learn how to teach actually, because I started teaching intuitively from this genetic and motivational part or pushy part from my teachers. But there I also I took what systematically and more how can I say in a more technical way, in a more formal way. So I started
formal training.
Formal training, of course. Yeah,
that's amazing.
So that was the form of that. And from that on, that it's like the root of a big tree that was growing up a lot. The destiny took me also to my husband. We have these amazing girls. They are amazing, and they speak the language we have here, Czech. And of course, at home, we speak Spanish. So that's I started also to say, okay, so perhaps a formal training in Spanish too. And last year, I got my diploma of Spanish teacher as a foreign language. So I'm very proud of that, because I could also review and brush up all this knowledge I have.
Multi-talented, Silvia. Wow.
25 years old teacher. Yeah. So,
Incredible
25
experience.
years of teaching. Yeah.
So we've covered Spanish, we've covered English, we've covered German, we've covered Czech. Are there any other languages that you started learning, and why did you want to learn those languages as well?
That's a very good question. So with foreign languages, I will tell you, it's not a secret, but how I felt. So when I started, this is still not a secret. When I started primary school, that was a French school, a private French school. And we had, it was not bilingual at all, but we had the French as a foreign language plus 2 or 3 subjects like, painting and drama and I don't know, culture, songs and so on. So I was having a feeling like, I'm becoming French, because I know to sing the national hymn and these things. But it was actually just French as a foreign language. And then when I started to learn English, so it was the 2nd or 3rd grade, I don't remember, I didn't understand anything. Yeah, I said, what is that? And I remember coming to my sister and saying, I don't know English. I won't ever speak that horrible language. And then she took her old textbooks and said, come here. I'm going to tell you. Which teacher do you have? Because she knew everything. She went to the same school as me. She had the same teachers. Yes, she's going to ask you this and this questions. Don't worry. So she was preparing me actually just for the test. And I was not having that idea of becoming English or American as the French feeling I had. To that. And it's changed a little bit when I changed that school, when I went to the grammar school, where the director really wanted us to become bilingual. So he had amazing teachers. They were all from Guatemala, but people who lived in the United States. And they were also teachers, formal trained. And I remember having not just the English as a foreign language stuff, but also literature, culture, a lot of reading, spelling, conversation, and movies, singing, and all this stuff that teenagers love at that time. So there I started to have the feeling, okay, yeah, I could become American. Yeah, so the same feeling I had. I'm just kidding. Yeah. And at that time, so because of my sister, I enrolled the German course. She said, "Oh, you know, there is a course here, 5 meters from here. If you want to go to this language school," I say, "Why not?" So I'm going to learn something else. But at that time, I was not so passionate with languages. I just enrolled the course because something new, and why not? And I think what opened my heart to languages was this course, this training in Munich and Berlin, when
That
I
really
met
made
all
you.
these amazing people. Yes. And I said, oh God, so I am here communicating in a language that it's not my language, with people from all over the world, with different
Right.
cultures, and sharing the same problems, fears, challenges.
Yeah, that's
while
the beauty of
teaching.
it for sure, right? It just
Very
brings
rewarding.
everyone together. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find as well, the more you learn something, the more you want to learn it, and the more languages you learn, the more you pick up bits of other languages, and you can start to connect it all, right?
Yeah, for
Sure.
sure.
Yeah. And you lose this feeling of the feeling I had when I was 9 or 8 years old. I won't ever learn, because you know you can, even if you're making mistakes, and it doesn't matter if you make them, because this is not your native language, and you are
Right.
here for learning, not for being perfect. Actually,
You're brave
Exactly.
enough for trying, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, how do you use all of these different languages when you're teaching? Do you use just one language, the language that you're teaching, or do you kind of use some of your other knowledge to help certain students?
Yeah, this is a good question, how I now use that. So I'm going to begin by this now. I finished, I don't know, like 3 months ago, training on CLIL, which is this content language and integrated. How is content CLIL? Language integrated learning approach. Yeah, so you have both things, like something from the subject at school, it could be mathematics, physics, or something from arts, it doesn't matter what, and you learn or you teach that in a foreign language, but in an L2 language, actually.
Yeah.
So normally, or traditionally, it started to be the second language. Sometimes it could be also a foreign language. And there, the knowledge of the L1 is a key factor, because it helps you with this scaffolding to stepping up to the next level, actually. So students learn first, what do they want or do they need to do? It's also all the time is based on a task. So you say, for example, I don't know, we're going to build a greenhouse in the school garden. Yeah. So, and that's all is explained in the L1. So there you use this pluricultural or multilingual knowledge to take them to this word, and step by step with the L2, then you build up this greenhouse. Yeah. So giving them the elements of grammar or communication, how to present the results, how to, I don't know, make a video and an interview or whatever. Yeah. And even the test, what is going to be, or the experiments sometimes, if it's, for example, physics and so on. So there is the motivation actually is given in the L1, and the results are presented in the L2, in the target language. There, the knowledge of another language is required from the teacher, or at least from one of the teachers who is involved in these projects.
Got it. That's really interesting. I was going to ask you, what are the advantages and what are some disadvantages? Maybe you've touched a little bit on advantages, but using these multiple languages for teaching online ESL classes specifically, what would you say are the advantages and disadvantages of using multiple languages, or maybe 2 languages?
I started my teaching career as a teacher for foreign languages, but while being here, and teaching my own daughters, actually. So transmitting my language and at the same time correcting them sometimes, so trying to just to guide them.
Keep them on track, right?
Yeah, keep them on track. Yeah, that's it. I discovered that it's a completely different word, the second language teaching as the foreign one. And from that experience, I started perhaps to attracting people who whose children are bilingual or lived in another country, and just the parents who wanted them to continue, for example, with this knowledge or to develop the language they were attached to. And there I discovered the treasure of the language, of the knowledge of their language. Even if I know the parents, they want me to speak them in French or English or in Spanish, but once the child knows that I can speak Czech or their native language, then the rapport is better. So is perhaps better is a wide word, but is the foundation of the lesson is not just based on the knowledge and what we're going to learn, but how we're going to learn, with whom I am learning. So who
more
I am
bonding,
trusting.
I guess, right?
Yes.
And kind of empathy as well. You can kind of understand them, they can understand you, right? Yeah, I got it.
And they know they can understand, even if sometimes we don't even use this language, but just the possibility of I can trust her and say something in my own language.
That security blanket kind of thing. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. The safe environment they need. And not just for children, some people that really need to learn very quickly because they come for work here in the Czech Republic or now online. I do also, for example, I'm teaching a guy who moved to Germany and he needs German language, and I am teaching him. The trial lesson was in Czech, and I told him, I'm going to talk to you just in German, but you can know, so during this 30 minutes that you can trust yourself. No matter what happens, I will understand you.
Yeah.
You can ask me the first things in your own language. I will try to explain you in German if it doesn't work, and so on and so on. So then you can explain them in their own language, how your expectations are, how some fears can be overcome, for example. Yeah. So
yeah. And do you find that so that's a great advantage, but do you find that can be a disadvantage sometimes as well? Like if you hear students speaking a language that you understand, do you sometimes refrain from telling them you know their language, or do you think that it can have some downsides to being able to speak their first language?
That's a very good question, and I think that fear of disadvantages had my first boss, the German director from that school, from whom I learned a lot, even the German language, because he was my teacher also. Before I started teaching, before I had also the formal training, so the very first lesson, I remember it was a Saturday, and on Friday in the afternoon, he told me, okay, tomorrow is your first lesson, and you are not allowed to use a single word in Spanish. The lesson is held in German, and here it is not allowed to speak Spanish. Wow. So I was very young, and it was my first lesson, so I believed that. So I took it for granted that you can't teach in another language than the target one. It worked in some extent. So my students learned something, and I believed that, and that was kind of my religion. So and I was taking this communicative method, which I learned also from my formal training, everywhere, like a big backpack, and everywhere I was offering that. I don't want to offend anyone, but like a religion, yeah. So believing that communicative method, that's the best, and somehow it worked. So they were working on and learning. The big shock came when I met a teacher is using the completely the opposite. This traditional grammar and translating method, and I am learning a language in a method I was avoiding. I was also not allowed to use. So what to do now? So you cannot teach the teacher how to change the methodology. If he's doing that. And then I started to realize that the the method is coming from the essence of the teacher. So, and I realized that I can also relax a little bit, slow down and say, why not? So why I can't translate a word if they really need it now? Why? And then I started just to accept the idea of using that knowledge of the other languages in my own lessons. So it is more like from that not down, no doing that and not accepting that, starting to accept, where I realized that that can't have any disadvantage if you accept if you know what you want to do with it.
You're using it more as an asset than
yes, an asset. Yeah, it's a tool. So if that doesn't work, okay, use that. Yeah. And sometimes it's for me an indicator. So if the students they know this word and they start using a lot again and coming back to their own language or to another language or translating into English, for example, if there is or a lingua franca, then I say, why? So is he nervous or is he like just losing this motivation or the focus? What is happening here? Yeah. So when I hear this foreign words within the lesson, it's for me more an indicator. So should I slow down perhaps, or do they really understand, or do they really want to are they still motivated? Yeah.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, because we talked about this before, Daniel and I've relaxed a little bit, but I am also have been using that backpack, wearing that backpack of English only. And I like what you said, that the fact that the students are resorting to translating and things like that could be a way, an indicator to what we're doing wrong as teachers, or how we should be helping them more, rather than just punishing them for trying to do that, right? Now, how do you think your knowledge of different languages, like you said, they've helped you in class? You started using it more as an asset. How specifically does that help you while you're teaching?
I think that the key thing is the rapport. That's I think that's a treasure. So because before, so I have also formal training on coaching. Before having that training, I was also wearing that backpack of the program, of the past, present, perfect, continuous, tense, gerund thing that we have to cover until the end of June, because otherwise the students are not going to be able to say any nice sentence in English or in whatever language. And as a coach, we're trained on listening to our clients, the customers, and the person who is in front of you, and ask them, what do you want? What do you need? How can I help you? These are the very first questions. So I realized also the coaching is so simple. So you just sit down and listen to the people and just take notes and have to be there as a listener. And if you can't listen their culture, so they don't have to, or even in advanced courses, sometimes grammar is very abstract, or sometimes grammar is very abstract in advanced levels. So you can translate table and let's say in Spanish, mesa. Okay. Or you can take a picture, but how can you translate the subjunctive in Spanish into English?
Yeah, it doesn't.
You don't have that in the English language. And it's a C1 English British student, which is speaking with you in Spanish, and he has no idea what it is. Yeah. So, but you know how it is in English, so you can compare. So you can like build this bridge. And this bridge is not just based on knowledge, on abstract knowledge, also this rapport telling them, I understand you. So this is something you don't have. Trust me, it's going to be okay. So just from knowing the other language or how the other language is formed, you can also help other people overcome that.
Definitely.
Fear.
Wonderful. It's a really great insight, and it's a really good breakdown of the process, because we do this and we know this all of the time, but we just don't think about the steps and the background and the context. So it's great that you've broken that down for us, Silvia. So thinking more about, our listeners, our teachers, how can they use maybe the languages that they know to, put them to work, to attract more students and communicate with them and build that rapport, like you said?
It's a good question. So attracting, it's an attractive word, of
Mhm.
course, and it sounds like a marketing strategy. So how can I have more students? Okay, I would like to have all the students, so everyone coming to me. So sustaining that would be perhaps for me like a key question. Okay, I told you I am learning Mandarin and Croatian. Perhaps there are teachers who are also at the same level who I am at Mandarin or Croatian. It's not knowing all the languages at the C1 level, or you are bilingual because you had the best French school and the best German director. It's not about, let's say, luck, but it's about who you are. So if, and put yourself in the position of where am I? So if I have a student who is struggling with A1, A0, so I could think, okay, I am in the same situation in this Mandarin A0 I am with all these characters and tones. So that can help me, not the knowledge of the Mandarin, but my own story, my own challenges as a learner can help me understand them better. And we're coming back again to the rapport thing. So it's not about knowing a lot of languages. And I wish I could speak Polish because I have a Polish student. Okay, so let's try now with this no knowledge, how challenging it could be. If I can understand his culture also beyond the language, if I can communicate with images, with mimic, so how can I also overcome this challenge of not knowing the language? So I think everything can be used. The advanced level of the language, the very low level, and the no level of the language.
It seems like it's all about connection, right? Creating that connection with it. Like you said, making it sustainable, because then once the student feels that connection to you, they will want to be your students for a long time.
Or the contrary. So I also encourage some of the students not to be attached to me all the time. So to become independent too.
Of course,
some of them, and they need another word, another phrase, and I say, and do you need them really? And they want more. And do you need them really? So that teach them also a little bit this self-confidence and this. Sometimes they even don't know why they are learning the language. Or children, teenagers too, or people who are doing just because English is the most important language, but they even are not doing any improvement, not making anything else than what is in the book, what I tell them, and I say, and what do you want? So sometimes I have to ask them, the other
guide them a little bit,
so on what they want.
So Silvia, you gave up a lot of great tips and insight into this, but just to wrap it up, what advice would you give to new teachers or those who are just starting out teaching online specifically? If their English is not as strong as other languages, would you give them any advice to overcome that?
I would ask them, why do you want to be a teacher? Why are you here? Why are you teaching? Why are you teaching online? Why ESL? So first, this why. And that's challenging sometimes to answer that. I could come back, I don't know, when I started teaching German, I would perhaps take a look at myself and would say, Silvia, do you like this? I would say yes, because I really was enjoying that. And I would say, just go ahead. So if you would like that, so just become the best, the best version of you. So if you really enjoy that, so discover more, go for it, learn more, try to improve the way you are doing, try to accept also different things. So be open to everything that comes. And something very, very important is I would say to me, don't be afraid of what your students would say. Don't be afraid of defeat, because actually in the teaching learning process, there is just success. What you have is like a lot of it's like an experiment, actually. I tell my students, you are here in our laboratory. So if it's a group or individual, so I say, be safe here. We're in a laboratory. So we're just, and we're not making any bomb. So don't worry, nothing is going to explode, even not the head. And we are just trying, there's a lot of attempts until you get to that success you were looking for.
Yeah.
So depending on how your expectation, how high it is, then you are going to get that success later, sooner or later. So, and that's the same with teachers. So once they, new teachers, once they see, oh, he's not understanding, this one is complaining, the other one is making the same mistake. So just try it again, try it in another form. And I also have been learning that I have the students I deserve. Perhaps somebody's going to listen to that and say, oh, that's hard, but they reflect what I need to notice.
That's true. The best feedback is from your students, right? And through learning and through them making mistakes and from us making mistakes, that's how we improve and grow as teachers, I think.
Yeah, and I really like, I think that the last message you're leaving us with is really powerful, as in there's no failure in teaching, in the teaching journey. It's all part of our learning. We're learning too, right? And that's just a process. Great. Yeah.
And it's a never ending process.
It is,
when I'm speaking now in English, making a lot of mistakes, pronunciation, structure, grammar, etc. And in Spanish, and I am not ashamed of that, because I know this is not my native language. And I try to do my best and to improve, of course. But in Spanish, oh God, when I see, I say, I wrote that. That's my own language. And I compare with Mr. Nobel Prize in literature. And so
of course,
we come back again to this expectation. So even if in Spanish, I am making a lot of mistakes, and also I have a lot to learn, and I am not the only one who speaks Spanish, and not the only one who speaks with this strange idiomatic expressions and so on. So there is a lot to improve and to enjoy more than improvement.
Absolutely.
There's the whole life. It's different as another profession. For example, being a doctor, a medicine doctor. So they started operating once they really can. So this is not you make your first operation in your first year, first semester of the university. But as teachers, actually, we can't kill anyone.
It's not, the risk isn't that high.
There is no risk. We're just learning. There is just the joy, actually.
Yes. It's a great message. Constantly tweak and adapt and modify and learn through your mistakes. And like you said right at the beginning, Silvia, have that mindset, be open to learning, and good teachers are good learners, and good learners are good teachers.
So Silvia, this has been great. How can our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to know more about what you talked about, or just reach out?
So my name is Silvia Chihakova, and the email address is CIHAKOVAS, like Chihakovas, @gmail.com.
Perfect.
I have also, from that on, I have also my YouTube channel with my 20 subscribers, which are my own students. So I put them really very amateur stuff for learning languages, or something I want to just to show to my students, or stuff for my students when they want to share something.
Great.
So
and that's
I
the
also
same,
want to work
spelling
on that a little bit in social media. So I teach also online on italki. So I teach there. I am as a professional teacher on German and Spanish language. So they can reach me also there, where I have amazing students.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we can also link it to our posts on Instagram and so on.
Okay.
Great.
Perhaps I will have also Instagram and all social media channels so they can reach me. But so far I have just this traditional way.
Great. Thank you so much, Silvia. This has been great.
Thanks for joining us today.
I thank you guys. It was amazing being with you
today.
Silvia, thanks so much for sharing your experiences of learning new languages and teaching as a polyglot.
Yeah, I think this is a great motivation for our listeners who might speak and use multiple languages in their classes. Hopefully you picked up some tips to help you going forward in the future. And if you found the content of this episode useful, we'd love to hear from you as always.
Yes, you can get in touch with us on Instagram at ESL Talk Podcast, or you can send us an email to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us individually on Instagram, and you can find me at Learning with Faye. Faye is Fey.
Or at I'm Daniel Teacher. So join us next week for another new episode of ESL Talk.
Thanks for listening.